Hello and welcome back to McClaren Performance for an episode today about Nottingham Forest. Yes, they've broken the bank to bring in loads of signings this transfer window, but behind the scenes there's a lot of reasoning as to why that is. Since I last looked at Nottingham Forest, I think they made 4 or 5 signings, and a lot of those were the defensive type of players. And looking now, I realise how much that has gone on, and I think it's about 15 signings now they've made. That's including the likes of Dean Henderson, Jesse Lingard, Nico Williams, Emmanuel Dennis, a lot of top quality players. And while it's good to have those quality players, it has faced a lot of criticism from a lot of people, as there is a history of clubs coming into the Premier League and spending a lot of money, and for that to then not be successful. The most recent example is Fulham, who came up, signed a lot of players, equivalent to I think 100 million, one of those being Mitrovic also, for them to go straight back down after that. And while on the face of it, yeah, there is a lot to look at and worry about in terms of the history of bringing in players like that and what has happened to them before, and looking at that in the context of Nottingham Forest. But if you take a closer look at it, I think there is a lot of logic, a lot of reasoning as to why this team are actually doing that. And there's not just reasoning there. In fact, what Forest are doing is very unique, very different, and very interesting. To explain exactly what they're doing and how it works, you have to go back to 2017, when Forest were looking in a very different situation. They'd just been taken over by a new owner. That owner is Evangelos Marinakis, a Greek owner who came in 2017 to change the fortunes of Nottingham Forest. In his words, planning to take Forest to European football within the next 5 years. However, obviously that dream didn't come to fruition, and over the next 5 years, Forest went through 8 different managers in a period that was definitely tumultuous. There was talk of a lot of unsuccessful transfers and generally a toxic culture and environment. This all changed though when, in an effort to correct all the mistakes over the past 4 years, Nottingham Forest hired a CEO, and so came in Dane Murphy. Now, Dane Murphy is probably the hidden source to Forest's recent success. At around the age of 35, he's the youngest acting CEO of a football club in, I think, any of the English leagues. In fact, what's quite unique about him is that, for one, he's American, but also he's never actually played in any of the English leagues at all, only playing out in America. And what put him on the map as a good CEO was his move to Barnsley in 2019. And this is where the foundations start to get laid for Nottingham Forest's success just a few years later. In the interview process for the Barnsley job, Dane Murphy had to talk to a few people who owned parts of the football club, but one of those people that interviewed him at the very end was a person called Billy Beane. If you don't know who Billy Beane is, he is Mr. Moneyball himself. He's Brad Pitt in the film Moneyball. He's all about data, all about analytics, famous for implementing that in baseball and making successful teams really from nothing. Billy Beane asked Dane Murphy if he knows anything about data implementation, anything about analytics, and Dane Murphy, in his honesty, says he knows absolutely nothing. And on that basis, Billy Beane then hires him as CEO, as he's the only one who is honest about knowing absolutely nothing about it. So because Billy Beane has a part ownership in Barnsley, a lot of their recruitment, their transfers are based on analytics. All the foundations that are taken from Moneyball, from baseball, are being applied to Barnsley. And this is where Dane Murphy learns everything about data implementation, analytics, how to recruit players and teams with numbers. In this, Barnsley used data around how they wanted to play. So it didn't just inform the type of players that they would get, it also informed the manager they would recruit and the staff they would bring in also. Seeing Dane Murphy talk about how they recruit managers and how they recruited a manager for Barnsley is absolutely interesting. The club itself had a philosophy for pressing in games. So what they did is went out to recruit managers, use data to find the exact type of managers that could play the way that they wanted to play. So, for example, they would look at a manager's out of possession statistics and other variables like that. That would bring them down to 4 or 5 different names, and from there they would then have an interview process talking to each and really finding which ones suited the environment of Barnsley. And in Dane Murphy's first season there at Barnsley, they narrowly avoid relegation despite having the lowest budget in the league. And not only that, next season they go on to finish 5th, also still with the lowest budget in the league. After that, Dane Murphy is recruited by Nottingham Forest, and you have to assume that he's taken over a lot of this understanding, a lot of this information, a lot of Moneyball logic, and brought it over to Nottingham Forest. And you can assume that because one of the first things he does is brings over a guy called George Chirianos. George used to be head of analytics at VfB Stuttgart, and his job is to bring a greater focus on data and analytics in Nottingham Forest. And he will massively inform the type of players that Nottingham Forest bring in and also take out of the club. And that's when things at Forest started to change. They started to target younger players, as they had a lot of older players in the team, targeted younger players and only gave them a maximum £18,000 a week. In George's own words, they gave up 10 players around the average age of 30 and brought in players around the average age of 23. And looking at the numbers, that really seems to be the case. In the 2021 season, before Dane Murphy comes in, the average age of players that they are bringing in is 27. And equally, the players that they are taking out of the club also average at an age of 27 also. Within the group of players that they are bringing in are the likes of, say, Harry Arter at the age of 30, Glenn Murray at the age of 37. So they are bringing in a lot of older players. Obviously, that approach changes in the 21-22 season as Dane Murphy comes in. In fact, they bring in a lot of younger players at an average age of 24 years old and carry on to get rid of players that are older. In fact, in that window, there were 8 players at the age of 30 or over that left the club. Despite these changes, they still had a rough start to the season, only getting 1 point out of 7 games. And in response to that, the club decided to sack the current manager, Chris Hughton. In hiring a new manager, they know they want an attacking, free-flowing style of football, but they also want a manager that is able to develop younger players, as they have recruited a lot of young players, just as Dane Murphy did at Barnsley just a few years ago. And so they bring in Steve Cooper, someone who matches perfectly exactly how they want to play and how they want to develop players. Not just recruiting the best manager possible, but one that fits perfectly within the system that they have in place already. And the rest is history as they get promoted that season, getting into the playoffs and winning the playoff final, finally getting into the Premier League. That leaves them with a bit of a problem though, because they are really based on making loan transfers. I think this season they've lost about 6 starting 11 players, and every season before that they've always relied heavily on loan transfers. I think 5 or 8 players that they bring in within a transfer window are usually loan transfers. In fact, looking at Forest transfer dealings over the past few years, there's no real difference from what they've done in the few years before as to they are doing now. The only difference is the transfers they're making now are much more permanent, paying for those transfers more so than they were the seasons before that. But the actual amount of players that they're bringing in is very similar. And their focus is still on young players that they know will grow and adapt to the system that they want to play. The average age of players coming in is still 24 years old. That includes Wayne Hennessy, their backup keeper from Burnley, who is actually 35 years old, and that brings the average up quite a lot. And they're still taking out players that average the age of 27. So they're bringing in the young, taking out the old, all in the structure of Moneyball, as they know that they are taking players that are undervalued at a young age, knowing that they will work within the system, knowing that these players will increase in value as time goes on, selling off those players and making a profit, putting that back into the club. Although Forest transfers this season looks a lot similar to clubs that are desperate coming from the Championship to stay in the Premier League, spend a lot of money to do that with no real plan. That is completely different to what is happening in Nottingham Forest. It is all based in analytics and data, but mainly it is based in understanding how they want to play and bringing in players that exactly fit that process, exactly fit the manager that they've brought in also. The club have done their research and they've seen that clubs that come up into the Premier League who play entirely defensively change exactly how they play to become a more defensive team, ultimately almost always end up going back down. The ones that do stay up, though, are the ones that stay consistent in exactly how they play. And in fact, if you look at how Nottingham Forest set up in their starting 11 throughout the last few games of the Championship, it is exactly the same as to how they play now in the first 2 Premier League games that they've played. They still play with a back 3, and they still have 2 fullbacks that cover a large majority of the pitch also. So they are highly defensive, but mainly they are still free-flowing and attacking as they always have been. Formation, the style of play has not changed at all. The only thing that has changed is the personnel that execute it on the pitch. And that is where people become concerned about team dynamics, but Steve Cooper has a real understanding of that. He knows that that will be a problem, and his focus has been on getting the team to collaborate and to communicate with each other, taking time, making sure that the players organise events for each other to get to know each other, to create a real camaraderie around the situation. They're also making sure that they're bringing in players that are really going to buy into what they are doing. For one, I think these players are very hungry to play. Dean Henderson has something to prove. Jesse Lingard has something to prove. Emmanuel Dennis has something to prove as well, his ability to be a striker in the Premier League. There has been a lot of talk about how much money Jesse Lingard is making at Nottingham Forest, and Dane Murphy was pretty quick to talk about how that wasn't the case. There's a lot of rumours about how much Jesse Lingard is earning, and it is not true. He wanted to play for a club that is close to his family, and he also wanted to be in a team in which he would be starting a lot of the time, so he'd get those minutes in to then get into the World Cup squad. So these players are hungry, they have desire, they're willing to talk and communicate and get along with each other. And I think you see that when they play West Ham, and you see their ability to fight for that clean sheet. It wasn't the best looking football at times. I think the goal that they did score against West Ham was really clumsy, really. But in their position, that's exactly what they have to do. At some point over even maybe the next few seasons, you then start to see the style of play that they want to play as they get more players in, and they will grow really into the Premier League. So really overall, it may look like Forest are really throwing it out there, just trying to get every player that they can possibly get in their team. But this is all methodical. This is all thought out. It's all on that foundation of Moneyball, of data, of analytics, of exactly the style of football they want to play with, the manager they want to manage it, and bring in players that suit that style. Looking into Nottingham Forest, what they've been doing over the past year or two, I'm very, very impressed. That doesn't mean I think they're going to absolutely storm the Premier League this season. I think they've got a real fight on their hands. Like I said, these are still players that are coming together for the first time. I still think they need to learn and adapt and understand how to play with one another on the pitch. But if they do manage to stay up this season, then I think they do have a bright future ahead of them. There's only a few clubs really that take this Moneyball approach and find any sort of success in it. Barnsley was someone to do that. Obviously, they got 5th in the league, the Championship. They haven't really done anything since then. The only other notable club that is doing this is Brentford, having a recruitment process based highly on data and analytics, and you can see how well that's working for them in the Premier League at the moment. I don't know if Forest, I don't know if they're gonna do as well as Brentford did in their first season in the Premier League, but if they're working under the same process, this Moneyball process, you'd expect to get the same results from that. The main lesson for me from all of this is, yeah, there's data and analytics and numbers. I think the important part is that the club itself, they understood every aspect of what they were doing. They knew the style of football they wanted to play. They knew they wanted to bring in younger players and develop them and sell them off for a higher price. They knew the type of manager they wanted to get to fit that system. They planned incredibly, not just for that season, and even though they got promotion that season, I think they were planning for years and years down the line. I don't think the lesson from this is, data and numbers and analytics and Moneyball, it's the secret ingredient. It'll fix everything if you look at a spreadsheet. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just having an awareness of every aspect of the club and managing that incredibly well. To not just spend money sporadically on players, whichever ones you think will work at the time, but to do so with data and a plan that informs it. That's how Nottingham Forest are doing everything completely differently, and that is definitely why it's going to work. And that is usually where I would end the episode, but I do want to talk about FPL just before I finish. Game week 2 was another kind of okay week for me. 73 points, exactly the same as last week. That has moved me up the table a little bit, and now I am 10th with 146 points. And that is 11 points away from the top. My defense, as always, was pretty solid. Mainly in midfield and up front, I got a lot of points. Jesus finally came into his own a little bit, getting 19 points, which is unbelievable. I think he's still going to be fantastic this season. I think Arsenal generally will be fantastic. I was a bit worried when Haaland only got an assist when I captained him over Salah, but of course Salah didn't do very well against Crystal Palace. Neither did Liverpool as a whole, really, apart from Luis Diaz, who really out of nowhere with a fantastic strike, getting me 9 points there. So in terms of Liverpool, in terms of that, Luis Diaz, he's looking okay. I'm not sure, he might be someone that I'll be going forward with. He hasn't really shown much other than that, obviously, incredible goal while they were down to 10 men. But other than that, I don't see a lot of threat from him, and there are definitely other options to take. Rashford let me down again, and I don't think I'm going to be going forward with him. Martinelli is looking like a great option to bring in. His price keeps going up all the time. I think I just have to get him in over Rashford, and that's really the only change I'm looking at making going into game week 3. As with everyone else, I think they're doing okay. Neto, maybe there's other options out there. I saw Eze is also 5.5, and he's doing a lot for Crystal Palace at the moment, having a great combination with Zaha, so maybe that is an option to take. But other than that, I'm not looking at much else. The winner this week, though, is James Wyatt with 11 and Hags. Obviously, getting a high score because of using the bench boost, and also making, I think, 5 transfers for minus 16 points. Wasn't really a great thing to do, but you definitely got the highest score this week. I think the main reason you did is Jesus captain. Really good idea, actually, and probably something I'll look at doing going forward. I think he's going to be scoring quite a lot. A lot of people weren't looking at doing that, obviously, because how poor he did last week, but it's obviously paid off here. Having Dean Henderson between the goalposts as well isn't a bad option either. Other than that, Ronaldo, Mitrovic, Sancho, I'm not really going for any of those. I don't think I will be going for them going forward. They'll probably be a weak part of your team this week as well. But yeah, congratulations to James. Fair play. Quite a few points this week. As always, you don't get anything, but thanks for playing. And yeah, that is it. Thank you for watching and listening as always. Let me know your thoughts on Nottingham Forest. Am I right in my judgments of what's happening there? What do you think of this Moneyball approach? Do you think it works? It's working for teams like Forest and Brentford, but say for Barnsley, that's not something that's helped them massively. Do you think bringing in all these players, I think 15 signings now, do you think that's going to work, or do you think it will just fail horribly and then end up back down the Championship with a lot of money spent? Let me know, and if you could like and subscribe on the video, that would be great. If you're listening, can you leave a review? That would be fantastic. 5 stars would be good. And yeah, thank you for watching and listening. I don't think I'll be doing an episode this Friday as I'm going away, but I will see you again next week.